What I love about this conference most is that instead of focusing on a lot of the things that we often think about, how am I going to make the next 60 days work? How am I going to find the next project, or how am I going to create it? This actually focuses on the process of creativity itself. To me, that's really interesting and really rare. So I'm glad you're here today, and it's what we'll be talking about. I'm going to go directly into sharing the screen now. And let's see if this will, you should be having a full screen right now. Do you have that? Can I get one of those? All right, yay, great. So today I'm talking about falling up the mountain. And specifically about the idea of using failure points. So this picture is, in a way, a great metaphor for what we'll be discussing today. That person is climbing, but also that person is in a precarious state. And so I want to talk for a moment about an orchestra that I heard about. This came through a woman that I know in New York City. She's deeply involved in the world of classical music, and she went to visit an orchestra she had heard about. And what she saw was something like this picture, but the occasion for it was quite unexpected. So she attended a rehearsal, and the orchestra was playing, and it's a terrific orchestra, and they played very, very well. And suddenly, in the middle of the rehearsal, the principal horn player, she told me, really made a mistake. And I don't mean a small mistake. I mean really one that splattered across the wall, a huge mistake. And this is what happened immediately afterwards. That the person next to that principal horn player high-fived the principal horn. So this huge mistake. And no one beat an eyelash, and on they went. When break came, she came up to someone she knew in the orchestra and said, "Could you please tell me what in the world that was about?" And what she heard back was something like this: "Well, we need to move from being a pretty good orchestra to a great orchestra. And for us to do that, what we have to explore is what we cannot do. So for us to do this, to enter the place that our vision is taking us, is to move away from our safe playing. So what we intend to do is to constantly test ourselves in rehearsal. And because it's so difficult and there's so much shame and so much that shows up inside our psychology when we fail, we ensure each other that we will confirm, good for you. You are pushing the edge of this orchestra towards where we're trying to go." So they had created a culture of exploring their edge, their failure points. And to me, when I heard that story, it completely transformed the way I thought about rehearsals. And I'm a conductor, but I think that it applies to all of us as creative artists. So what does Ascent look like? It looks something like this. You set a vision, I want to go and climb, and then maybe you set a goal of I want to climb a particular thing. And then as you do it, you enter into a state of exploration, and you begin to ascend until you don't, because suddenly there's a failure point when you can't ascend. And this is a discovery moment. So what happens then? And I think that this happens to all of us as creative artists. What happens then in the discovery moment is we begin to innovate and we begin to create options for ourselves. We actually begin to ask, what if? And we iterate over and over again inside this process between exploration, failure point, discovery, what if? Do it again. Exploration, failure point, discovery, what if? Over and over again. That's our iteration as we go through the process of creating. And the reason I think about this as a good metaphor is because creating art is actually a fairly dangerous game. And by that, I mean that if we're going to create real art, we will go to the edge and we will test our limits and we will do things that have not been done before. And that is inherently dangerous. Moreover, because we're artists, either performing artists or artists that bring our art into the public through galleries and through shows, we do this in a rather public forum. Even it may be while we create, or it may be after we create and we show what we've made, but we have absolutely lived in a dangerous environment. So danger is uncomfortable. I found this wonderful image. And to me, this just really captures the whole thing. that house isn't falling, but it is so precarious. And this for me is what it is like when we're in a creative environment. And what really began to speak to me was, as I was working with better and better soloists in my career, I noticed that the best soloists almost always almost fail. I didn't say they almost always fail. I said they almost always almost fail. And I began to talk with these artists about how is it that both you don't fail, but that you are so near the edge. And they, to the person, have said, you know what? The way you do that is when you're preparing, you have to prepare near your edge. And that means constantly working in your preparation to your failure point. You have to actually know where that is. And if you thought of this as a superhighway or as a road or as a path or as a trail, what it means is you won't really find what you're looking for in the middle, in the safety place. So if art is risky, the thing that I find is that we've got to work with our art where we get outside the prescribed lines. So for us, I don't know if you remember, but I remember being handed the crayons, and those lines were basically suggestions. And I found I was much more interested in crayons and a blank piece of paper than one that told me where I should be coloring. And that was just an innate thing. To be a creative artist is not to seek lines to be inside, it's to seek lines to move past. And so I began to think about, I'm a classical musician, we could do this with the Beatles, or we could do this with film, but I'm going to do it right now inside classical music. What are examples of getting outside the lines when we get unsafe? So here's a good example, Beethoven's Eroica. It's a symphony 2 times as long as any symphony that took place before. He had to completely rethink architecture, time, scale, and the way he would fill that. Here's another one, Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. It's a story about these doomed lovers, and the pace of harmonic change was parallel to exploring their psyche. So he really goes inside the mind, and in order to do that, he has to slow down the rate of harmonic change. He also has to avoid tonic constantly. And tonic just means home plate. So imagine you're playing a baseball game, and instead of coming home, you run out to the outfield. You just never really quite land where you want the ear to land. And that keeps this tension going throughout this very, very long opera. But what it keeps doing is pulling you over and over again into the next moment. And finally, this piece, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, a complete reinvention of music in the 20th century, to be one of the most creative but also dangerous pieces that have ever been made, and And one of the things I think about is it was so shocking to the audience that audience rioted when they heard it. They literally were hitting each other in the concert hall. Some of them saying, "This is the future of music," and others saying words that I shan't say right now, but it's absolutely saying this is not the future of music. So he reimagined harmony with much more dissonance. He reimagined rhythms with much less predictability. And in the course of doing that, he reimagined the 20th century. Everything was a starting off point from these kinds of pieces. Eroica remade everything that happened afterwards. Tristan remade everything that happened afterwards. And so did Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. These are all outside the lines. So this means that if we're going to climb, we climb by preparing to fall. And that means an acceptance of process. What I love about this woman climbing is if you look at her, everything here accepts that she expects to fall that day. Everything on her says, I will fall. It doesn't say I won't fall. It says, I have prepared myself to fall. I know I'm climbing, and climbing means falling up the mountain. So she's preparing herself to do that. And as she climbs, those things will keep her both safe and also able to explore the mountain completely. So what is falling? Is it failure or is it feedback? And I think a lot of us, we get really caught here because when we don't make it in our creative moment, we really begin to attack ourselves. But actually, that's not what's going on. Because what happens when you fall in mountain climbing is the mountain is basically telling you something. Not this way. Not this way. It doesn't say not anyway. It doesn't say you can't climb me. It says, you haven't figured me out yet. You haven't solved my issue, not this way. So in order for us to climb mountains, we have to walk through something. And I decided to name this thing the Gateway of Fears. And as an artist, I think we get caught right here. We start with one fear, but actually I want to start with two, and here they are. We usually focus on the fear of failure. These are a personal frame fear. I failed. I don't have the technique for this, or I failed in my major idea, or I failed to communicate what I was really trying to do. And we then berate ourselves, you know, as good artists do. I think we've done a good job by berating ourselves. We aren't, by the way. It's not helpful at all. It just gets in the way. It's one more obstruction. But then maybe you develop a certain level of language and you begin to say, you know, I'm beginning to get this. And the second fear arises, which is, what if I get this right? By the way, that should have two C's. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. So success in this image is a secondary fear, because then I have shifted my role from starting artist, from struggling artist to successful artist. So success shows up often a little bit later in the game. It's a shadow of the first fear, but they actually come together. The next two fears, for me anyway, happen in the public space. And there is a fear of praise, which seems odd, but actually is part of the journey, and a fear of shame. I found this picture, which I adore. It is a picture from a potter who has created a piece that is supposed to be standing straight up. His exploration of the piece was to use thin, thin, thin clay. And when he did, and when he set it, it actually collapsed. And this happened over and over again as he was exploring, how thin can I get it? The beauty of this is then this artist created an exhibition of all these pieces that didn't work. He entered into the public sphere with his failure points. I found this to be fascinating. So the second two areas of fear that I at least explore are, how am I being seen? First was, how do I see myself? Now, the failure point that I've got to walk through is, yes, but how do others see me? And how do I fear that? This takes me to the fifth fear, which is a time-related fear, and it's a fear that fits into the future and the past, which is a transformation fear. What will become of me? So I found this wonderful picture to try to illustrate this point. The past, this future is what will become of me in the future, but the past is this death of what I know, which is to say the death of the past artist, because Stravinsky, the day after Rite of Spring, is not the same Stravinsky as the day before Rite of Spring. And the same is true of Beethoven before Eroica, and the same is true of Wagner before Tristan. The artist is transformed in the process of making the art. And in the course of doing that process, the artist is changing themselves as well as creating the art. The sixth and final fear for me is like this butterfly. It's the fear of freedom. What if I were actually free? What if I were actually unbound? Unbound by anything. And in the current work that I'm doing, there's a wonderful essay called Actualizing the Fundamental Point, but I'm going to use part of that, actualizing life itself. Because life itself, for this butterfly, is to be free to fly. And that means that he or she has choices. Do I fly past or to one of these? Do I land on it? What do I do? The final fear is the fear that I'm actually responsible for my own life as a creative, and I'm responsible for what I've chosen to create. So as I see it anyway, these are your two choices and my two choices, and anyone who is a creative. These are the two choices: danger, do not enter, or danger, please take care. So if I don't want to enter, I don't have to write Eroica. And I know all the symphonies that I can write after that. They will sound a lot like Symphony number 1 and number 2 of Beethoven. I know that if I don't want to enter and write Tristan, music won't take the leap that it takes, because Wagner is the one to make that leap. And I know that if I don't want to enter and I'm Stravinsky, Rite of Spring will have to be made in some other kind of way. And his unique voice to contribute to that development, to that change, to that complete reimagining of music in the 20th century doesn't happen through Stravinsky's vision. But all of them agree to walk to the cliff. All of them agree to go to the edge. All of them agree that they are going to dance with catastrophe as they create what they make. And so the answer for me anyway is go to the cliff, but take care. Prepare to fall. So why do we need failure points? Because they reveal our edges. This is as far as I know how to go right now. They test our motivation. Why am I here? Am I here to be on the summit, or am I here to ascend this mountain? Motivation, my gosh, wow, motivation. They make us humble, because when we see a failure point moment, it really, really takes us back. It is hard to be proud and full of yourself when you faced a failure point. They teach, they clarify. And of course, as I've said before, they change. I thought I would give you a fairly shocking failure point. Here is one. Here's a Da Vinci failure point. Of course, it's a great masterpiece. We all agree on that. But we also have to agree that this is not how to put paint on a wall, because this particular picture illustrates something that Da Vinci was trying to do, which was to make his own Eroica, his own Tristan, his own Rite of Spring. He was making the Last Supper, and as he was making that a full wall-size creation, he was going to make it in a new way. I have sometimes contemplated, he was such a good scientist. What if he did know? What if this piece is about, I go to prepare a place for you that's not this place? What if this piece might be about moth and rust corrupting? What if this piece is actually intentional? It's just a thought, but I'm going to assume that this isn't what he meant. I'm going to assume that he wanted a painting that stayed, that was immortal, and he didn't get one. We are looking at failure as a failure point, but we're not looking at failure as an artist. Quite the opposite. This artist has leaped across the mountain. So I wanted to end with a picture of the entryway to my condominium. The thing that happened as we were preparing to move was that the sister of my life partner suggested that we take a piece of furniture and blackwash it. I'd never blackwashed anything. I didn't know the word blackwash. And so I literally got on YouTube and began to read about it. And I must have watched 20 or 30 or 40 videos on how to blackwash. And then being an artist, I said, yeah, but I don't want to do it that way. So what I immediately then began to do was to rethink this whole thing. What if I used blue instead of just black, and I could actually take some of my colors and pull them in from the painting that was going to be above it. And then I could actually create this unified piece. And what if on the top, I could just have this black top? And so I started to do it, and I worked, and nothing worked. Absolutely nothing worked. Absolutely nothing worked. It's a complete unadulterated failure. And when you enter my apartment, that's what you see. And I love it. I love it. It took me a long time to love it because I didn't see my initial vision. What I saw was my final result, and I didn't understand what had been made. But finally, when I could see it with the eyes that no longer looked at the old vision, the opening set, if you will, of my mind, I could actually see that, you know what? None of those videos on YouTube teach me how to make this particular piece. They don't climb this mountain. They climb their own mountain. And this is what a creative does. A creative basically stops and says, I don't know how to climb you, but I know the important thing. which is that I take the first step and I let you teach me. So what a mountain does is tell you not this way. And what the creative does is keep filling in that blank. Well, then how? Then how? Then how? And they don't give up. So in talking about this opening picture, I want to finish with this image and then to say this is what's most important to me about failure points. It's good to be a flawed human being because that's all we can be. That is the only option. And so what I would want to say is that when we tell this, when we basically share that with the world, we've actually told the truth. That's the task of the creative artist. My name is John Thomas Dodson. You can find me at johnthomasdodson.com. My email is just johnthomasdodson@gmail. So it's pretty easy. And I will quit sharing this screen. Let's come back out. I hope I can. Stop the share. There we go. And I would love it, Sarah, if you would unmute people. Do you mind doing that?
Of course, yeah, we have a couple minutes left. So if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free. You have the ability to unmute now.
Thank you for doing that. I want to just start with, I know I've got a room full of creatives, and I wonder if anybody in here has ever failed. As an artist, have you ever used failure points? Have you learned from failure points? Would anybody be willing to sort of just jump in and be seen as a flawed human being who creates? Go for it. Jay, you're on.
Yeah, I'm always on lately, right? You know, it's funny because what you're talking about, I see that my failures in my former career actually became my strengths, because where I failed to find an answer or, you know, help the person that I was trying to help, it spurred me to keep looking for more answers. It's like, why can't I help this baby do what they need to do? Why can't I help this parent do what they need to do? And so what I'm getting right now from your talk really is the parallels of where I was and where I am as a creative, going back into, you know, my passions of photography and restoration and art and whatnot, and kind of more of a realization that, oh, it's okay if I messed up that picture. It's okay if, you know, this portrait shoot that I did of my best friend 3 weeks ago, my ISO was way too high and most of the pictures are garbage, because I can actually take something from that and I'm learning from that as I go. And so you've kind of like really pinpointed a number of things for me personally in my current situation that are very, it's like, okay, I can breathe. It's okay.
I'm so glad to hear it. Thank you for that. That's just wonderful to hear. I see that Alberto is in here, and I'm going to ask him something, because you are constantly creating. And do you ever, you seem to like flow. You're totally in sync with the vibrations of this universe, and you're on it. Do you ever have to work with failure points? Do you ever?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, yeah, I appreciate that all the time, to answer your question. Absolutely. You know, I appreciate your but yeah, it's all around us, you know, and again, it goes back to vibrations and frequencies, and that's like in everything through the universe, and we're these bodies in here, and everything's coming at us from everything. From, you know, so I try to control what I can as much as possible from my end. But yeah, constantly, you know, so I will turn things off. You know, I'm very particular about sounds, you know, particular about smells, you know, I'm very particular about all of these vibrational things that I know affect me. So I try to share that with people, saying, you know, if you're aware of it, then you're already halfway past the battle, because now you're aware of it. Then the trick becomes, how do I then manage and deal with it?